this is actually a session that'll be led by myself and Eric for the Canon La Gafflière, which also went through a big process change. So this session is about whether we can actually taste the change in the winery, right? So can we actually taste what happened in the past? So it's interesting philosophically whether that's in the glass, okay? Now, what makes this difficult is the fact that you have house styles. If you do want to change, and there have been changes, you have to uproot, replant. That takes time in order to keep things consistent so as not to confuse the brand. You leg into your change slowly, right? Because you want to make sure your brand is consistent and the customers know what to expect when they see it. And so all of these factors mitigate against being able to truly taste a change, especially when there are all sorts of confounding factors. So for example, you have vintage to vintage variation, right? And then across a lot of years, you have the effects of age. And then with age comes bottle variation, which becomes magnified over time, and cellaring conditions, and blah, 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 blah. So with all of that, we're still trying to see if there are at least one or two examples where we can actually taste a change that occurred in the winery in the past. And so we're going to start with Quinault L'Enclos. Quinault L'Enclos, they're the two wines that are on the placemat right now. A little bit of background about Quinault L'Enclos. Let me interrupt myself right now. I had less of a presentation, but more reference materials, and it's on my laptop, and we only have 4 tables. It's a really intimate crowd right here, so I'm happy to just move it from table to table. Quinault L'Enclos, and the map is on is on my laptop, is in Saint-Emilion now. It actually was not in Saint-Emilion because the appellation of Saint-Emilion has expanded to subsume what was then the appellation of sable, of sand. And that was the appellation that comprised the vineyards within the city limits, more or less, of Libourne, where the soil is sandy and gravelly and clayey, as opposed to the estuariated limestone plateau, where most of the well-known vineyards are in the Saint-Emilion appellation. So now it is in Saint-Emilion, but it's distinctly different. As a matter of fact, it's right in the city. I mean, it's in the city. It's right next to the cemetery. You know, whether its full-bodied nature comes from that proximity, I don't know.
Meat and wine. Yeah.
That's right. But nevertheless, it stands kind of separate from the other Saint-Emilion wineries. So regarding change, it was a vineyard in disrepair throughout most of the 70s, 80s, and then Alain Reynaud purchased the vineyard. And when he did, he put a lot of love, time, energy into it, and back then started to introduce some relatively now modern vinification techniques, so the greater use of oak, and you know, these types of fashions equilibrate back and forth, right? And so microvinification, the use of oak, sometimes trying out 200% oak, which sounds impossible. 100 seems to be the highest, but if you rebarrel it in new oak at 6 months, then you get 200% oak. That's the math. So things like this were new. Alain Reynaud tried it, and then in 2004 Bernard Arnault.
2008.
2008. Sorry about that. 2008. 2005 is the wine. So 2008, where I think he's the owner or one of the big owners of LVMH, one of the richest men in the world, principal owner, all right, and also the owner of Cheval Blanc, right? So in addition to the money, the wherewithal to purchase this from Alain Reynaud, he also had the resources to deploy in order to make this winery kind of in his own image, the way that he'd like to have it done. And you would think with all those resources, they'd sort of add more, even more oak, more this, more that, because he had the money to do that. But they actually pulled back. So instead of vinification in the barriques, the 225 liter barrique, I think that's the Bordeaux, 230, 225 is Bordeaux. Yeah, okay. Excuse me? I think 2.25 hectoliters, but 225 liters. Because otherwise it would be very big. But he moved from that to new oak, but 500 liters. And it doesn't seem like much of a change, but as we just talked about with the volume to surface area thing, that's actually a drastic change because it's not a linear relationship as you increase the size, the ratio, the surface area, the inside surface area to the volume of liquid in it gets lowered dramatically. So there should be less appearance of that new oak, right? And then there are also some changes that he had put in place after he purchased. The team wanted to make the wine a little bit less showy, flamboyant, exuberant, and so what they did was they started to pick earlier, right? And it's particularly important because of the vineyard's location. So it's not on the estuariated plateau, estuariated limestone plateau. It's in the city center. City centers tend to be warmer. The sand makes things even warmer. And so ripening occurs naturally a bit earlier in that location compared to the rest of Saint-Emilion. And so for them to make the decision to pick even earlier is to sort of address what would be a natural tendency towards overripeness and jamminess just because of the way things ripen based on the vineyard's situation. The two wines represent wines on both sides of this boundary, this 2008 boundary. So one is 2005, the other one is 2018. And there's 13 years of age. So we're going to have to mentally undo that, okay? Because aging is not a process change in the winery. That's just aging, right? But what we're going to try to see is if we can taste some of the process changes that I just described. Okay?
So are these the two front wines?
The two front wines, the left is before the purchase, the right is after the purchase, and
the back wines?
excuse me? No, they're on the tasting mat, on the placemat right now. Just whatever's on the placemat right now, that's Quinault L'Enclos, Chateau Quinault L'Enclos.
So that's backwards from the way that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna roll with it.
These two are the Quinault L'Enclos.
Yeah, La Gafflière. Yeah,
Those are the ones behind.
that's right. So don't rearrange anything. Just
I have comments on the.
Yeah. Yeah. What's on the paper right now? Let's taste that, and let's start the Parlement right now. right? Go ahead, nose it, taste it, get your watches out, time the length, you know. I'd love to hear what you guys think, and please discuss among yourselves. If you'd like to have a little bit more background information that I just described in a slide form, I'm happy to pass my phone around or the computer around so you can see.
No, they're just like
Now I don't have the same.
So, a couple of thoughts. I don't want to influence any decisions you make, but if you're tasting more fruitiness in the older wine, right, that would be interesting because that tends to decrease over those years, right? So you have, excuse me?
What decreases?
The fruitiness.
Yes.
So you have 13 years for the fruitiness to decrease, but if you're still tasting more fruit in the older wine, that's something to keep in mind.
That's what and also the older wine is more tannic, and that suggests what you were talking about.
Yeah, yep. That and yep. And how about like vanilla-like notes or spice? See if there's a difference, right? And it may be integrated in the sense that the tannins and the spice, it doesn't feel like a two-pronged attack, but it feels like one. But
the 06 is so tannic. I don't taste the oak as much.
Now that's interesting, right?
Right.
So you've had 13 years for those tannins to polymerize, as we, but I wonder what happened.
Right.
So, in many ways, some of these tasting notes, if there were no process change, should have been reversed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Right. That's exactly right. It's actually incredible. Dramatic. Another thing that's dramatic is twice when Tesla stock has gone down.
Yes.
I've seen headlines that say the richest man in the world is now a Frenchman who's never heard of
Yeah. Any thoughts or?
oh, this is terrific.
Yeah. Well, it's my preference, right? But preference aside, which one has the spice, the tannin? Which one is heavier tannin, heavier spice? If you had to pick, which one has a bit maybe more fruit?
I would say that the 18 has
A little bit.
a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
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 It's well balanced.
Hey. All right.
Balanced.
Yeah.
It's almost like there's no flow.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
very particular.
Yeah.
I would be very interested to see that wine in 30 years.
Yeah.
But now the 05 for me has too much acidity
Yes.
when I drink it. And because of the acidity, and because it's a different space in my tongue, a region of my tongue, then how can it inhibit the sensation of the other?
That's what I was going to ask you. Yeah. Okay. How does that affect the other stuff? Yeah. yeah. That's right. Yeah.
In fact,
yeah.
it's not even in the belly.
Yeah.
The mouth at all.
Yeah. Yeah. It almost like the whole idea of a counter irritant. Like if you have a headache and hit your finger, your headache goes away, but it doesn't really go away. It's just you're focused on this right there. Yeah. Neither of these wines are terrible wines, so that's what we wanted to control for, is not just the fact that it's Pinot Blanc, but also they're from good years and they're good wines. So one's not a junky wine, one's a good wine. They're both fine years, but the process is different, and that's what's important here.
I think you covered
Yes. Yeah.
exposure length. Is there a fundamental difference in between these two vintages?
Sure. Yeah, a huge one. This is barrique, so 225 liter barrique. This is 500 liter foutre. Yeah. So it's but the double, it doesn't mean it's half. It's a lot. It's more because of the surface area to volume ratio. It's a much less oak influence. Right, much less oak influence. This one should have a lot more oak, and also the picking of the grapes is quite different. This one, I think this may be the last year to have Malbec, or it may still have some Malbec. There's no Malbec here, so there are several changes here.
That was a choice of the winemaker to get rid of the Malbec.
And then replace it with Cabernet Sauvignon. Yes, yeah, exactly. And very intentional, very intentional.
In terms of rating, not this, but did the ratings increase with the changes?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let me confirm. Let me double check with you, right? I mean, millions to Bernard Arnault is like pocket change for us, so I don't think he really cares. But I understand the point, right? There should be some ROI.
Well, there will be.
Yeah.
It's a terrific for 2018.
Yeah.
That must be a different thing.
Are you guys able to taste any process differences here?
I think the oak is more balanced on the 18. It's
All right.
more, or maybe less
Right.
or,
Yeah.
or it's more balanced.
Yep. Keep on going. That's
Neither one has much going on.
okay.
I wouldn't buy the wine. I'm not a big fan of the wines.
Yeah.
The 18 is much softer, more approachable.
Yeah. These. I mean, preference aside.
It's
Yeah.
youthful. It's youthful.
Yeah.
But it's much softer. The tannins are much more
I
predominant.
think
You're left
it's
with
balanced.
But hold on.
That tells me it's more balanced.
Yeah.
More integrated.
More integrated, more
Yeah.
balanced. All the components are in alignment. You know that
more
they're.
gentle respect of the terroir rather than post vineyard timbre.
But
More
let's-
oak and stuff.
Let's think about this. With age comes the polymerization of the tannins, and if the process were the same, you would have the diminished sensation of tannins on your mouth, but you have increased tannins in your mouth, right? And then you have this acidity that seems to be prominent in the 05, but not in the 18, right? But more youthful wines show their acidity more than older wines, right?
Right.
So
Then you have a ripe year for 18, which they tended to be pretty fruity and ripe wines.
Yeah.
Whereas 5s have always been unapproachable.
So now this is really interesting because
Limes are approachable.
This is much more
the
approachable. I mean, I just want to talk about softness.
in many ways the younger wine has the older wine's characteristics, right? So
it has its
Except on the
softness. It doesn't have any
finish.
tertiary.
Yeah.
There's nothing tertiary going on.
Well, it's not.
in either one.
Yeah.
There's something in the finish that to me talks about the purity of the fruit
Yeah.
that I don't get in the first one.
Yeah,
On the
yeah,
finish.
yeah.
And that tells me more about the process. And I think it,
So, you know who the
I
director
think,
of
not the
record is?
vintage necessarily. And
The vintages are roughly, they're not, the wines are rated around the same, the vintages are roughly speaking around the same. Obviously, I can't control for everything.
18s are much riper and much more approachable young, whereas the 5s are just monsters. They're still monsters.
But it was a ripe
And the
year.
18s you can approach.
You know.
we're supposed
18s
to
you
talk
can,
about the process, not the vintage.
but
Yeah.
you can't separate the two.
Because the 05,
Two are involved.
the 05 is
all sorts of factors.
It was undrinkable for.
Let me get your attention for just a minute. I'd like to introduce the Canon La Gaffalière, just very briefly. And the way I'm going to introduce this distinguished Grand Cru Classé B Saint-Emilion wine is through the family itself. And it comes from the von Neipperg family, which has only been making wine in Germany for about 900 years. And
Silly whites.
right. And the property was purchased in 1971 by Hubert von Neipperg, Count von Hubert von Neipperg, and then bringing all of that history and ideas from Germany, but honoring the terroir and the nature of the Canon La Gaffalière. Comte Hubert passed it on to his son, whom many of you have met, Count Stefan von Neipperg, in 1985. And by listening to Stefan talk, which we've had the honor of doing probably about 6 different times, he began to look at this piece of land not just as a Grand Cru vineyard, but as an opportunity to express the family's interest in the long-term cultivation of fine wine and the terroir. So in doing that, he knew he had 3 children and would need to figure out whom to pass it on. But in the meantime, he was looking at the land and the chateau itself as part of a legacy, so that he wanted to make sure that the actual terroir had the strength and the capacity to go for the long term. And that was the fundamental philosophy behind this choice of moving to full organic wine production and techniques. What you have in your hands in these 2 Canon La Gaffalière are 2 wines, same location, same vineyard, obviously different years, and you can accommodate that. But the older one will be just a regular non-organic. The whole vineyard was certified organic in 2012. And so the 2 wines you have bracket the certification of our becoming organic, each by
6 years.
6 years. And so this is part of the experiment. Today, again, you've got different years and different ages, but you also have a different winemaking or viticulture, really, philosophy in the 2 wines, separated by or on the shoulders of the year where they were certified organic. So, good luck.
How many years prior to certification does the vineyard have to be practicing organic farming?
I think it's like at least 3 years.
It depends upon which certifying body they go through. And one of the things that is really hard about all of these certifications is that there are as many that are accepted as 40 different sources of certification, and the degree of strength, how much they're really asking for, differs by those associations.
Is
So you pick the
one that's more rigorous?
Off the top of my head, I can't tell you, but I can look that up. Yeah.
Bon appetit.
Yes.
Taste and tell.
delicious.
I mean, what I'm trying to do is understand, can I taste the organics?
Right.
There's something for me.
Or what is the nature of the change?
What is, yeah.
For me, there's-
Both delicious.
Oh, yeah, like you'd love to have them.
Right.
There's something for me about the 2018.
But I actually would probably assume
Tree root.
Are you buying tree
What's it coming out? What's it
Probably. Came out because, yes, I'm not sure which
Especially for the money.
That would be fun to do.
So one of my favorite plants ever was actually shot because long 19 So it's like 15 years.
That is legendary wine by legendary. Yeah. So little. So we had.
And his wife had we had finished it's a great story. So we finished tasting the wines at the drive and more food cellar right upstairs next to the dining room. We said, I'm gonna go get something. And we tasted this wine. This one feels more right. And then his wife called. And
Her aura was buzzing. Says the scientist. I'm touchy-feely.
And the wine was already revealed at that point. He said, we just had the shot every time. Her answer was, oh yeah.
That's generous.
Oh, that's cute. He's since passed away, and every time I see her, I tell his story,
That's sweet. You're a great group to share a bottle of like that is
Using the metaphor like it's
so very possible. He lived in Highland Yeah, he passed away 10 years ago. In Highland Park, at his home. I live in Lake Bluff. Really? I do. I live in Tangley.
Okay. Well, I guess
We can stay in here and eat lunch.
Spend any time with Tony Carlotta?
Yeah.
We would probably net take
So I'd like to collect a few observations. You have an interesting set of wines in front of you. One of the things you have is two wines from this gorgeous 2018 vintage, which is hard to actually have an opportunity to do that as such a young wine, etc. But so the two questions I have. One has to do with the shift between the two wines, and can you detect anything as a result of the viticultural change?
Yes.
And the other is, so let's start there. What do you detect?
Well, with the Pinot Le Clos, it seems like the 2005 was the 2005 was a massive, highly extracted wine that still seems very young.
Yeah.
And that the LVMH change made it softer, more delicate, and we're seeing that in the 2018. And it's interesting that there's a 13-year gap, and yet the 2005 seems less developed than the current one. That's what I thought.
Power of that vintage.
Yeah.
I'm still waiting for most of my 2005 to even be open.
Right. So it's a combination of the vintage and the vinification, I think, because 2018s are accessible in general and 2005s are barely. So it may not be just the changes they made, but it's also the vintage. I agree.
And the weather. Other observations?
I had some. I'm differing a little bit from Richard. I really didn't find the 2018 Kino that interesting. I thought it was a little bit flabby, unfocused. I thought it lacked the kind of complexity that the 2005 had. By contrast, I thought the Canon Le Gaffelier, I understood the difference from the organic, and I've tasted this in many different iterations. I think particularly for some white Burgundies that also went from non-organic to organic. Their wines historically have been very austere. They became more rich and more broad. I think that's a general characteristic of what happens when you go organic. But I think somehow Canon Le Gaffelier found a balance still with that richness and greater body, but a better preservation of the tannins and the complexity, which I just think got a little bit lost in the Kino.
Yeah. And the interesting thing as well is to reflect on the fact that the Kino sort of has multiple philosophies and multiple owners. But the Canon Le Gaffelier, since at least 1971, has had one family involved with one philosophy and some continuity. Other observations?
I have one observation in that I have never heard any of the Bordelais say off camera that biodynamic, well, no, let's leave biodynamic out, that organic versus non-organic makes any difference in the taste of the wine. It's just a process that's, it's a nice idea, and it's not. But I haven't heard anyone say it makes any difference in the end product, and that perhaps any change that occurs if somebody switches to organic or biodynamic, or part of it could be it's the vintage changes and other things they're doing in the cellar and their viticulture and everything. But isolating the organic element,
right.
I've never heard that you could isolate that.
Well, and today you've got that component isolated, but can you in fact contrast the two Canon Le Gaffelier in any dimension?
To me, the vintages are too different. I'm tasting more vintage differences, especially in the Canon Le Clos. The 18 is very soft, approachable, not a lot going on there to me, but there's not a lot going on the 05 either. But the 05 is much more massive. The tannins are still not resolved, and you can't approach it. So the 18 is more approachable now. Canalagaffe, a little different story to me. The 6 is more approachable, but the 18 still has that. It's big and lots of kirsch and purple fruits and things. And
a lot of vanilla in the 18. I think the vanilla overruns the. What I got from the Canalagaffe, because I agree. I don't think there's any organic impact that is detectable here. What's most detectable is the massive amounts of vanilla in the 2018. And that's winery. That's not viticulture.
How do they put the vanilla in? Is that oak barrels?
Oak.
Yeah.
How big are their
bean
pods?
Yeah.
I'm intrigued for this particular test, not to necessarily think like we're doing what we normally do in tasting wine. In other words, when I taste a difference in the Canalagaffe for something that we don't normally think about, which is the degree of viscosity. That's not something we talk about a lot in wine. So for the 2018, the word that came to mind for me was, it's a cleaner wine. Okay, that the viscosity has a very consistent experience on my palate. Now that's not a big thing we look at in terms of wine. So maybe it doesn't matter about the taste. I will say I enjoyed it more, but we may want to just think about this from a different lens than just our usual wine tasting.
Great, thank you. One more comment. Somebody had one here. Marc-Andre.
All of them.
There you go. All right, so I'll try to summarize some of the observations that we had. One observation is that the Quinol Cru for us, at least at the table, was more equilibrated than the 05. And just because there was much more acidity in the 05 than the the Quinol Cru was bold in pretty much all of the dimensions, but it was very approachable now, and I'm trying to project how it's going to taste in 13 years because it's just stunning right now. We'll see what time will tell. When I compare the Canalagaffe, there is the vintage difference definitely that I can pick up first, but I'm not necessarily able to pick up any differences in terms of all of the modifications in the winery, unless he's not wearing any red trousers now. And I'm kidding.
He's gone to the green trousers.
To the green, okay. What I feel is that the 18 is so powerful, so how to say that, not open, that it needs time to see how it's going to evolve. So if I had, and we had the other comparison trying to compare the 05 and the 06, and clearly I can't remember what we said, that the Canalagaffe was better than the Quinol for the older vintages, just because of the balance. But in terms of comparing side by side the 18s, clearly the Quinol was right now best than the Quinol. But I don't know what's going to happen in 5 years. So time will tell.
They're both young.
But right now, it's just my approach, my palate, and my personal preference. I think that for me, the winner is number 2. The Quinol Cru 18.
And we looked it up. It's $54. Yeah.